Hello everyone, welcome to Live Interactive English. I'm Mike.
And I'm Sam.
And it's part 2 of our visit with Bruce and the spider. This is a cute story of a little boy and his pet spider and all the adventures they have. No, it's not that story at all.
No.
It's about King Bruce of Scotland and how he lost a lot of battles against the evil King Edward, maybe Edward II first, I don't know. One of the King Edwards was attacking Scotland. King Bruce was fighting back, and it wasn't going well. They were losing all the battles. King Bruce had to run away with his soldiers because they didn't win again. And as he was hiding under a shed or in a cave, King Bruce watched a spider building a web. That's so far all that's happened in the story. It's interesting, but it doesn't look like King Bruce is about to win a war here if he's hiding with a spider. So what do you think is going to happen with this story? Will King Bruce be A, bitten by the spider and die? Will he B, raise an army of spiders and attack the English? Or C, become inspired by the spider to continue fighting?
Well, I know that this story is kind of half legend, half truth.
Okay, yeah.
So I feel like I can't go with the spider army, even though that would be a great answer.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yes.
Not the spider army.
And I also don't think he dies because he's got to be some kind of hero figure in some way.
True.
So I'm going to go with the last one and say that he's going to be inspired. But I'm wondering if it's going to be like a Charlotte's Web kind of thing where the spider's going to write something in its web and they're going to give some inspirational words to King Bruce.
Yeah.
Or what exactly can this spider do to make him think, hey, I can beat the English?
It's a good question. How can a little spider inspire a king to win a war? We're going to find out in Bruce and the Spider Part 2. So no spider army?
No, but that would be really cool. It's a good idea for a movie.
King Bruce watched the spider carefully. The spider tried many times to connect its web to a nearby beam. Every time, the spider's thread failed to attach to the beam, and the spider had to start over again. King Bruce watched with fascination.
Poor thing,
He said sadly.
You too know the feeling of failure.
All right, so Bruce and the Spider Part 2. Last we saw him, King Bruce was just watching a spider working really hard, weaving its little web in the shed that they're both hiding from the rain under.
Yes, so let's go ahead and continue with our reading and see what exactly is this spider going to do. Why has it captured King Bruce's attention and all that kind of stuff? I know, it's just a spider. But as we continue with our reading, we see King Bruce watched the spider carefully. The spider tried many times to connect its web to a nearby beam. Okay, so he's watching the spider because, again, he's tired, he's by himself, there's nothing else to do.
Nothing on TV.
It's raining outside, so he's just watching the spider, and the spider's trying to connect the web to a beam. So we have this word connect, which is a verb that means to link two things together. So in this case, the spider is trying to link its web to the beam to make it stick together. We also use this a lot as far as technology goes when we are connecting things to Wi-Fi or connecting to your computer or connecting to, well, anything really. And so we have an example sentence. I've connected my phone to the computer. So you might do that if you're going to share photos or going to play a slideshow or something like that.
Absolutely. You can do it physically by actually plugging things in. That wire makes the connection, which would be the noun. But you're right, we also use it in sort of a way you can't touch and see. I'll connect to you by phone or connect things using Wi-Fi or something like that. In this case, though, it is actually connecting parts of the shed to its web. It's using its web to connect the web to the shed. And in this case, it's using the beams of the shed to connect to. What is a beam? A beam is basically something we use when we're building things, and it acts as a support. It acts kind of as a bone in the building. So if you look up in a ceiling and you see like a large piece going from one wall to the other or holding things up, we would call those beams. If you're making a big roof like this, having some beams to kind of make it into a triangle shape instead of just two lines, those beams would make it much stronger. So imagine a simple wooden building. You'd have wooden walls, a ceiling, and then some beams would probably help the thing be stronger, stand up in a windstorm. Those beams will connect the walls and ceiling, making the building much better. So for this word, we have these steel beams support the weight of the entire building. Yeah, steel is used. And again, go to a really large building, look up at the ceiling, and you'll probably see lots of beams there holding everything together, making it strong. Now, I've never actually watched a spider weaving a web. I mean, you've seen the web, and you might see the spider there kind of wandering around. To actually sit down for an hour, I don't know, how long does it take? So this is something he's actually watching, and it turns out that spiders, they make mistakes. They don't always build the web exactly right the first time. It says every time the spider's thread, or its silk, failed to attach to the beam, and the spider had to start over again. So it's sort of like watching one person putting up a building. It would take a long time, they'd make mistakes, they'd have little problems, they would just have to keep going, keep working at it. So this spider was probably feeling a little frustrated, if spiders feel frustrated, but it wasn't quitting. King Bruce watched with fascination. He's watching. It's very interesting. Again, there's nothing on television. He doesn't have any books or magazines. It's, 1,000 years ago, so he's a little bored. Poor thing, he said sadly. You too know the feeling of failure. Interesting. So as he's watching this spider try hard to build the web but fail, Robert Bruce feels a little bit of the same feeling that the spider probably has, that it's just not working. It just has to keep on trying, but it is facing failure.
Yeah, actually, thinking about this, my first visual, you mentioned somebody, just one person building a house. My mind jumped to a person trying to put up a tent.
Okay.
I always see somebody trying to put up a tent.
On a windy day.
You get like one side done, and you go to the other side, and then that side falls down. And
gotta go back.
Oh, man.
Exactly.
But you kind of have to get it done, just like the spider, because the spider needs to have a place to live eat and all that kind of stuff. If you're camping, you need to have a tent, so it can be very frustrating, but you have to push through. And in this reading part, we had the word thread. Thread is a noun. So thread is a very small piece of string. In general, this is the meaning that we use, the definition we use for this word. But here we can also use it as far as the spiders. It's not really thread because it's a type of silk and kind of like, I think it's even mixed with their spit and this kind of stuff because it's something that comes from the spider's body, but it's a thin, narrow strip of something. And so it looks like a string or a thread that you might use for sewing or you might use in your clothes. They all have threads in there.
My buttons have threads to hold each one on.
Yes, and if your button falls off, you need to re-thread it and things like that. And so we use this same word thread to talk about the thin strip of the spider's web. And so we have our example sentence, the spider hung from a single thread. So when they drop down and they're just sitting right in front of you like that. Ugh.
Maybe it's starting to build its web at that point.
Maybe.
Or maybe it's just trying to scare you.
Yeah, I feel it's more.
Or both. All right, let's take a break and we'll be back with Robert the Bruce and his spider friend.
Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny。我们在前一天的故事读到 ，King Bruce 在一个棚子下躲雨，他躺在地上时看到一只蜘蛛正在他的上方织网。那只蜘蛛啊，试着要把它的网连到附近一根横梁上，试了很多次，那每次蜘蛛丝都无法固定在横梁上，他又得从头开始。那 King Bruce 就感叹着啊，那只可怜的小蜘蛛也知道失败的感受。来看单字 connect。 它是指使连接、使接通，把什么联系起来。Connect A to B 就是把 A 连到 B 上。那它的名词 connection 就有那种连接、关联的意思。再来看到 beam 在这边是指梁或者是横梁，那么它还可以用来指光束的那种意思哦。再来看到 thread 是名词，它是指线、细丝或者是丝状物，它可以当动词来表达穿线或者是把什么穿成一串。Sam 老师提到说，如果我们的衣服扣子掉了，你就得重新穿线嘛。这时候他在 thread 前面加上 re，rethread 就可以表达重新穿线哦。这回到课文中。
He observed the spider as it kept trying and trying. After falling short of the beam 6 times, the spider tried for a 7th time and finally stuck its web to the target. King Bruce felt encouraged.
I too will try a 7th time,
He cried. King Bruce called upon his people and raised their spirits. Soon he had a stronger army than ever before. He led them into battle, fought off the attackers, and sent the English home in defeat. The lesson that King Bruce had learned was something he never forgot. That little spider had taught him to keep trying until he reached success.
All right, so Robert Bruce is in his shed. The spider's there trying to build its web. It's really struggling, but it's not quitting. That's the important thing. And Robert Bruce is fascinated by this spider and its never say die attitude. As we get back, we read that's Robert Bruce. He observed the spider as it kept trying and trying. I think it said it was raining. So you can imagine also the rain is know, coming inside, maybe knocking the spider, making things wet. This spider is dealing with all sorts of challenges and difficulties, and it's not giving up. And as we said, Robert Bruce finds this very interesting, and he's observing it very closely. When you observe something, you watch something, you look at something, but it's more than just looking at or watching something. You're kind of watching it, and your brain is really working at the same time. You're thinking about what you're watching. You're trying to understand it. You're trying to get more information or answer questions in your mind, So for example, a scientist might observe the behavior of animals. You might go to the zoo and say, hey, that's a walrus, that's a seal, that's a penguin. But the scientist would go and say, what are they doing? How are they behaving? What noises are they making? They're observing things to try to learn from watching. For example, Bill observed that a crowd had gathered around the injured man. So he's noticing these things, and maybe he's noticing that one of them is giving the man some medical help. So, these are the kinds of things that would be important and useful in an emergency.
Yes, and so we've got this king observing this spider, but we see him start to be kind of inspired, but it hasn't quite reached that level yet. And so if we continue reading, we have the next part that says, after falling short of the beam 6 times. So, hey, that number 6 sounds a lot like how many battles our king has lost so far. So there might be a connection there. And so we said after falling short of the beam 6 times, the spider tried for a 7th time and finally stuck its web to the target. Yay. King Bruce felt encouraged. I too will try a 7th time, he cried.
Ah, interesting. So yeah, he is getting inspiration from this spider. As you say, the spider tried and failed 6 times to build a web, just as Bruce and his soldiers fought 6 times against the English army. They lost, but maybe if they try one more time, like the spider, they will succeed. So King Bruce called upon his people and raised their spirits. This is after he gets out of the shed.
Yes.
Hopefully being careful not to
disturb the
spider in its web. So he kind of sneaks out of there. Thanks, spider. Runs off, finds his soldiers and says, we're going to try one more time. He raised their spirits. He gets everyone to believe that they can win just like he does. And soon, we read, he had a stronger army than ever before. So before he had 10,000 men, now he's got 50,000 men, and they're all looking for a fight, looking to beat those English. He led them into battle, fought off the attackers, and sent the English home in defeat. So there you go. It succeeded. They had a big fight. I think this might be the Battle of Stirling. I'm not sure about that. But anyways, I think this was King Edward II. He sent them home in defeat. Basically, he kicked the English army out of Scotland, sent them back south, and won the war.
I wonder if maybe he put the spider on his shoulder when he rode into battle. And so he said, me and the spider, go!
Or at least paint the spider on his shield.
Oh, that
might
would
be
be cool.
Scary too, right?
That would be cool. And so then we read, the lesson that King Bruce had learned was something he never forgot. That little spider had taught him to keep trying until he reached success. So he learned a lot from this tiny little spider just hanging out on the wall. So.
Absolutely. And I think, as I said, they made the story of Robert Bruce into a Netflix movie. And I'm actually not sure that the spider story is in the film.
Oh, bummer.
But I do remember when they asked a bunch of people today, what do you remember from school about King Robert Bruce? Everybody remembers the spider story. Very little other things could they tell you. Very few other things could they tell you about Robert Bruce. But the spider story, everyone remembers. It's a very inspiring tale. So what do you think, guys? Pretend that you are King Bruce in the shed. All right, so you're Scottish, you're a man, you're wearing a kilt, you're cold, and you've just lost a battle. You see the spider succeed on its 7th attempt. What would you do? I know what you would do.
I mean, if it was...
I know what you would do.
I feel
you
like...
You would burn down the shed.
Yeah. It depends on... I guess I would have to say it depends on how big the spider was.
It's teeny.
But I would then maybe I could just squish it. I don't need to burn the shed. But I think, honestly, if I was King Bruce, I might be able to draw some inspiration from this, but it would be a lot that I would need to think about because you're still putting all of your country's men's lives at danger.
True.
So you still kind of need to think, am I really like getting some kind of message from this spider or am I trying to make a message and then it's still going to hurt us in the long run?
That's a very good point. Even though the spider succeeded, it didn't mean Robert and his men would succeed.
Yes.
It's lucky they did. Or he could have just squashed the spider and said, now I will go and squash the English king like the spider, and saved a lot of time. Anyways, what about you guys? Would Robert Bruce inspire you? Does this kind of story make you feel you can do anything? Have a chat about that, and we'll see you back here with more great articles sometime soon. Until then, goodbye.
King Bruce 注意到那只蜘蛛它不断的尝试，那这边用到 observe 就有看到、注意到或是观察的意思。那一只蜘蛛啊，它的网一直够不到横梁，达不到目标，失败了6次之后，它尝试第7次，终于成功了。King Bruce 就受到鼓励激励，他就决定也要尝试第7次，他就号召他的人民，提振他们精神。很快的，他就拥有一支比以往任何时候都还更强大的军队，然后结果成功击退了入侵者，让英格兰人战败归国。好 ，King Bruce 从那只小蜘蛛身上学到，就是要不断的尝试，直到获得成功为止。老师们开玩笑说，不晓得 King Bruce 上战场的时候有没有把这个小蜘蛛放在肩膀上，跟他并肩作战，或者是在盾牌上面画蜘蛛的图案。老师用到 shield，S-H-I-E-L-D，shield 就是盾牌。那老师们最后再回答说，如果自己是 King Bruce 的话会怎么做？然后就有开玩笑说，如果是那种很小只的蜘蛛，可能会干脆用手捏下去了。我们补充一下 ，squish 跟 squash 这2个动词呢，都可以用来表达压扁、挤压的意思。还有提到 kilt 就是苏格兰男用的短裙咯。好，那这边4个重点，我们进入文法时间。好，我们来看重点。Fall short of 加名词是表达达不到，像是达不到标准啊、预期等等。其中的 fall short 就是达不到目标，不如预期或希望的那样好、那样成功。那后面常常就会接 of 加名词，例如 their performance fell short of expectations， 他们的表现未如预期。那下一个重点是 call upon， 它表示号召啊、呼吁，常常用在正式请求，去呼吁某人做某事。用法就是 call upon somebody to 加原形动词，像是 the government called upon people to get vaccinated， 政府呼吁民众接种疫苗。好，下一个重点是比较级加上 than ever before， 表示比以往任何时候更怎么样，前所未有的怎么样。那么副词 ever 在这边是指说以往任何时候啊，或是曾经， 用在比较级和最高级之后来表示强调。举例来说，如果我们看到这个前任啊，现在过得比较快乐，你就说 You look happier than ever before。你看起来呢，比以往任何时候更快乐。你就要唱说，直到分手后，你不难过，你比从前快乐。好了，下一个重点是 until， 表示直到点点点才停止。那它可以当连接词，后面接子句，那也可以当介系词，后面接名词。例如 He watched TV until his wife came home。他看电视呢，直到他太太回到家为止。或者是我们再造个例句，他说 He watched TV until midnight。他看电视看到半夜12点。好，那以上是这个讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
King Bruce watched the spider carefully. The spider tried many times to connect its web to a nearby beam. Every time, the spider's thread failed to attach to the beam, and the spider had to start over again. King Bruce watched with fascination.
Poor thing.
He said sadly.
You too know the feeling of failure.
He observed the spider as it kept trying and trying. After falling short of the beam 6 times, the spider tried for a 7th time and finally stuck its web to the target. King Bruce felt encouraged.
I too will try a 7th time.
He cried. King Bruce called upon his people and raised their spirits. Soon he had a stronger army than ever before. He led them into battle, fought off the attackers, and sent the English home in defeat. The lesson that King Bruce had learned was something he never forgot. That little spider had taught him to keep trying until he reached success.
Hello, I'm Matt.
And I'm Vivian.
Today we're playing Word Drop. We each have 3 cards that we have not looked at yet, and they have words or phrases that we're going to fit into a conversation as smoothly as we can. Okay, should I start the conversation?
Go ahead.
All right, okay. Let me, anyway, yeah, I don't know where to go with this. So, I don't know, I'm just gonna, this morning before I came here, I was watching a documentary, and it was interesting. It's about Tony Hawk.
Okay.
He's a professional skateboarder, so it's a
Yep.
pretty interesting documentary because, you know, he's been very famous like for so
years,
long.
yeah.
So like it really, watching the documentary, you know, really connected me to my youth.
That's great. I think it's really funny because Tony Hawk always comes up in like those Twitter stories about how people don't recognize him. So he likes to observe how people react to like him saying that he's Tony Hawk, and they're like, "No, you're not." And he shows them their ID, and he's like, "Nope, I'm Tony Hawk." But he likes to observe and tell people on
okay.
Twitter
Okay.
like how they react. It's really funny.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think, yeah. How can I, let me think. Okay, so, yeah, when I was skateboarding, well, I mean, I skateboarded a little bit when I was young, and, you know, one time I ripped my jeans, and my mom was angry, but I told her that I could fix them because I could sew the knee shut. So I did it. I just went and got a needle and thread and fixed my jeans.
Wow, that's a really good skill to have.
Yes.
Yeah. I will say one of the coolest things I see are some skateboarders who like to like jump up on the beams of like buildings and like skirt off of that. It's so cool.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, that's something that I think you have to be really, really careful when you're doing that, because you know if you're skateboarding and you're aiming for something, and you know you can get really hurt if you fall short of that thing
Yeah.
that you're aiming for. Fall
For
short of
sure.
your mark.
For sure. And I think that's why it's so important for the leaders of who are, the leaders of the community of skateboarding or whatever sport you have that you're a part of to call upon the kids who are trying new things to be really safe and to make sure that safety is always first.
Oh, okay, yes, of course. Anyway, yeah.
Did you skateboard for a long time? as a
Not
kid?
much, no.
See you next time.